So, hi everybody, it's Barbara Biziou, and I am doing a special series of incredible women for Women's History Month. And the first person that I am so excited, is my friend and my colleague, Elayne Fluker. She is not only an executive coach for high performance women and a facilitator, but she has a podcast, Support is Sexy. She wrote a book, which I actually loved, Get Over I Got It. And she is a media maven. In fact, as when I met her, she was working in media, almost 15 years ago, I guess it was.
Yes.
So I have
Mhm.
watched her grow and expand, and I am just so delighted and happy to have her here. She is a force to be reckoned with. And as we all know, women are the way showers of this century. We are going to really need all our feminine power in both aspects of it, all aspects of it. So, Elayne, what I love about what you sent me is this new idea of bad bitch, soft life, right? Okay,
That's
but
right.
before we go into it, I really want to know, how did you come to it? Because when I met you, you were actually in corporate America in media, right? And then you transitioned into, writing and consulting and doing all kinds of amazing things. And now you're supporting high-powered women. Also, you have a media project in the works and a podcast. So how did you get from, we have to do it this way to, wait a minute, maybe we need to be a little softer too and bring it all together?
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you, first of all, Barbara, for having me. I'm so excited at any time to speak to you. And I just, how much I love you and care about you and have for over a decade now. So thank you for having me. And yes, this idea came from, I first started talking about support is sexy. So that's the name of my podcast. And just a phrase I used to say to myself and to other friends about the power of, especially ambitious women, knowing how to embrace support, because we sort of bought into this story that we have to do it all alone. And I always say having it all doesn't mean doing it all alone, right? And as time transitioned and I began to interview so many women around the world, yourself included, on the podcast, I've spoken to over 500 diverse women leaders all around the world, super ambitious, know how to go out there, know how to get things done. And we have this sort of image in our society, if you will, of the bad bitch that takes care of business and handles everything, is the head of corporate at these different organizations or doing it in their personal lives. And we're, just that woman. But I wanted to remind all of these women the importance of embracing your softer side as well, which is interesting to have this discussion, especially now when we're getting more messaging around certain leaders in industries saying that they want their companies to have more quote unquote masculine energy. And
Right,
we know that tapping into that feminine energy, which isn't a gender specific thing, right? Your feminine
right.
energy, as you well know, is very much about tapping into this idea of receiving, abundance, your softer side, a little more emotional intelligence, usually, not so much the driver, as opposed to being aware of people and their surroundings, which I believe we need even more of in the world, or more awareness around. So that is where this concept comes from. You can still certainly be the ambitious woman, accomplish your goals, and do those things, and not be embarrassed or feel guilty or anything around that. So I'm always sure to say that because I like to see myself as that
Yeah.
woman. I also, though, have to even remind myself about the importance of the softer side. And softer side could be making sure you have healthy boundaries. You're not, giving into superwoman syndrome of doing everything on your own. The softer side, it to me, it's more than like the bottomless brunches and sitting poolside or spa days, although we love that too.
That.
I'm here in Mexico, I love that too. I love sitting by the pool. There's also just the way you're living your life and taking care of yourself and being aware of that. So giving women permission to have both sides exist at the same time.
And what you're bringing up such an important point because, as you know, I mean, I've been working with building the spiritual and mental, emotional resiliency and muscles for 30 years or something.
Yes.
And yes, in the beginning, I remember I had to wear these corporate suits so I looked more masculine or more really
Yes.
conservative. I could never wear jewelry like this or the earrings that you're wearing. And I love jewelry. So
Yes.
and I realized as I had more and more women in my groups, in fact, as I just taught a YPO group the other day, and very successful women making lots of money and stuff. Yet, what was missing, to your point, was being able to access that more feminine, intuitive, compassionate, side, and the slowing down and taking time for themselves and not feeling you have to just push, push, push. Because as you know, and as you said, right now we're seeing a breakdown of the old patriarchal, model. Although it looks like it's stronger than ever, it's really breaking down. We're seeing people holding on for dear life, you know, and we know that even though it's painful to watch it, eventually it's going to collapse.
Yes, completely agree. I think this is such a moment of great change and a shift, which you've been speaking about. Well, your whole career, as long as I've known you for 15 years, but certainly right now, I believe it's coming to light. This idea of this big shift happening, and you've been talking about this sort of coming. I believe just what you said, and I've been reading more about that. This is sort of what happens before there is a big shift in society, and those who want things to stay the same or go back or make, something how it was before, as we've seen a lot of that messaging, those individuals are going to hold on tightly and try to break things down and take things back. And in some ways, they might be successful or seemingly successful in the moment. But those of us who are intentional about moving our world, not even the country, our world forward, our
Right.
society forward, and all the ways that we know that we are evolving for the better, for the greater good, are the ones who will eventually end up victorious. So the part of, I think, chaos is a lot of the strategy right now. I think chaos and cruelty actually is a lot of the strategy for a lot of leaders right now, unfortunately. However, like we're talking about, being that's a very important time to be very much grounded in your feminine energy of how you're going to treat yourself during this time, being connected to community. And I will say, this isn't saying ignore your masculine energy, because there are times you need to tap into that as well. But a lot of, at least the women that I coach, high performing women, or like I said, ambitious, or even a lot of the high profile, camera facing, if you will, women, they
Right.
kind of have the masculine energy thing down. They have the driven
Yes.
part of it down. It's actually the other part they need the reminder of. Don't give up on that just because we're in hard times. In fact, I think it's actually more important for us to tap into the softer parts of us, connecting, community, other women we're connected with, being helpful for each other, not getting caught up in this sort of hoarding, holding on to, grabbing thing, as opposed to, an openness. And it takes a lot of trust, though. And I, certainly am not speaking as though I have it all figured out for sure. I come to you plenty of times with, I don't know what's going on and what are we going to do. But even that is the softer side. We have to give ourselves space to be able to do that too.
Yeah. So when these women who you work with right now, and let's talk about right now, the
Yes.
people that you're working with, and they'll come to you and they'll go, wait a minute, Elayne, this is what's happening in my company, and they're getting more and more bullish and, really that what I call the negative male model, that fight kind of,
Mhm.
I'm first, you're second, I'm going to win, you're going to lose kind of theory, which we know doesn't really work and is not sustainable. And how do you help them? What do you say to them? How do you convince them that it's important to be in the softer part as well to integrate it?
Yes,
What
that's
would
a
you tell
fantastic.
them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say a lot of the women who come to me overall, and certainly during this time, it is actually the first place or space where they're able to be really vulnerable about what they're experiencing. So the first thing I try to encourage them to do is talk about how they really feel. Because if they're in a certain position at a company, and for example, I've had women right now who happen to be women of color, or some of them happen to be in the LGBTQ community, and they're essentially being asked to erase themselves from the company, remove things from
Yeah,
websites, or this is the change that companies are making for whatever reason, on the federal side in the United States. But essentially, you're being asked to sort of erase yourself, or we can't do certain things as we did before publicly to support you. And then you have to sit there, because it's your job and your livelihood, and put on a brave face or whatever you have to do to manage it. So when we get together, I like to create space for them to tell me, how does that really feel? What are you feeling about that? Whether it's, rightfully so, fear, anger, whatever the emotion is. I have learned a long time ago, first feel and second solve, and then go into what are the solutions and the things that you can do in order to move forward. But creating the space, the softness for the vulnerability. And some of the women, I will say, have even, broken down in tears, not even necessarily because they're sad, maybe there's some of that, but really because this is the first time they're able to do this. And I will share, it's not, and these aren't women who don't have family, who don't have friends, who don't have partners or husbands, but sometimes they also don't want to burden those individuals with the challenges they're having. You don't always want to go home and talk about work and all these other feelings, or you're trying to stay, brave and be that person for whoever is around you. So I always make sure to create a space for them to share what it is they need and what they're experiencing.
Which is fantastic, and for the women who can't afford one-on-one coaching, it's just so important to find groups of like-minded women. I think not that there aren't men out there who are supportive, because we know there are. It's not just gender-based. However, you need like-minded people who understand that you do have to acknowledge how you're feeling. You don't have to hold on to it, but if you don't acknowledge it, it gets stuck in your body. It gets stuck in your cells.
Yes.
You get sick. We know that, you know, and you don't want to have a heart attack right now, and you don't want to get sick, or you don't want to fall. And, so it's so
It's
important
not
to really have that balance.
Yes, it's not. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's the thing too. To stress, this isn't all woo woo and a nice to have and that kind of thing. There are studies about how this, and most people, if they really thought about it, will know
Right.
it will impact you one way or another if you don't tap into this softer side. I mean, you mentioned my book earlier, and that's one of the things I mentioned in there: science backed information and studies about how women have higher, especially in leadership, higher levels of stress. And these aren't things we're saying from a state of victimhood. We
Right.
would rather not be the people who have higher levels of stress. Let it be just stress because you're a leader, as opposed to stress because you're a woman in leadership. Let us be talking about pay because we don't like the pay for all individuals in this certain position, not because men still, if this in the same position, make more than women just because they're men. No, no woman I know is like, oh, I want to be the victim. I'm so glad I'm in this situation where things are worse. These aren't things that we want to talk about or have to deal with either, but they are things that you deal with. And those things have an impact on you and can be a stressor for you. And you need to be aware of that and do these other things to counter it that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of many, many years ago. I had a friend way back in high school who wound up being, I think she was the first woman who ran a, major motion picture studio. And at one point she was interviewed because she was tough as nails. I mean, she was a tough one, you know. And at one point when they interviewed her, kind of at the end, she said, "The one thing I regret is not supporting other women. I used to think there only was room for me at the top,
Mhm.
and everyone else was competition. And I'm really sorry about that. And I wish I had supported other women more." And that's part of what you're saying too, is as you're allowing yourself that softer side to really acknowledge that not only are you feeling vulnerable or whatever, but everyone else is too. You're not the only
Right,
one. Everyone is feeling vulnerable right now. Some people hide it better than others, you know but it gives them permission then to support other people as well, and not to share everything. As we know, the work is not
right.
the forum for sharing everything in your life. However, to be in that place of vulnerability is emotionally intelligent, where then it gives other people permission to also share how they're feeling and open up the
Yeah.
conversation.
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that, because I love this idea too of women being aware of the importance of grace for ourselves, but even to between generations right now, I think is very important, from because all these different generations are in the workplace, from boomers are
Right.
working longer down to, Gen Z. I think it's Z, right? That's entering the workplace now. I'm
Yeah.
Gen X.
I
I'm
know.
52. I
I
can't remember the
know.
difference. I think it's Gen Z. I think they're in their 20s now, but you might all be, that's like three or four generations at least in the workplace together.
That's
And
right.
understanding a woman, like your perspective, I remember working for, say what you will about her, Martha Stewart in 2014 or so. I think it was 2012, 2014.
I
And
think
people
that's
have said that,
you actually, you were working for her. Yeah.
yeah, it was like, yeah, around that time. And for her company, I would work for, with her personally, even though I
Right.
met her personally. But I will say there were conversations and things about her personality and how she did things and all those things, say what you will. One of the things during that time that came to light for me was trying to understand, not excuse, but you can try to understand generationally, or what this individual may have thought they needed to do in order to be successful. So, like you mentioned for your friend, maybe she thought she couldn't help other women, or that there was
Right,
only room for her, because it was an environment where there is only room for one woman, in this particular position. Or there is, again, not excuse, but to try to understand, where is this person coming from? What might be, this is emotional intelligence, right? What might be the reason that they are so cold, or very, in Martha Stewart's case, in my opinion, masculine energy, very much
right.
present, very much a driver, very much a certain kind of ways of leadership, and being aware of that. And then on the other side of that, if you're a more senior generation and looking at someone who is Gen Z, who might be much more in their feminine energy, much more about compassion, cares very much, passionately about everything from climate change to this and that, is very in touch with boundaries, whereas my generation was very much, you go to work, you get it done, you
Right,
never let them see you cry. My mother always put
right.
that. Whereas the other generation might be more, how can we have, and this is part of the softening, how can we have grace and understanding for each other during this time? I think for anybody, but especially all of us as women, because when these DEI changes happen, it's not just Black, it's not just LGBT, it's not just women, it's all of us. We're all in this together. It's impacting all of us if you're in a quote unquote marginalized group, right? So, how can we all have better understanding for each other so we can work better together? We're going to need to support each other even more at work nowadays. And then, of course, in some of the bigger issues that we started off talking about. So, I love that you mentioned that example of it, because now she has a certain level of awareness, right? Like, oh, I wish so now she can mentor whatever she chooses to do. But still, for me, I right away understand
Mm.
why she might have thought that at that time.
Well, I think you have a great point. I mean, I was at an event the other day in New York at Joe's Pub. It's called Generations. And there was a woman in her 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all talking about overcoming certain obstacles. They were gay, they were straight, they
Oh,
were Black, they were white, they were Asian, and you got to see, the intersection of where people were coming from. I mean, when I tell some younger girls today, and I say girls, I mean, younger ones, that in 1972, a woman couldn't get a credit card without having a man sign for it. They kind of look at me
yes,
like I'm from Mars. And I said,
yes.
no, you could not get your own credit card. You couldn't get a mortgage on
Couldn't buy a house. Yes, my
by
mother says
I mean,
she
and
couldn't
they
buy a
go,
house.
what? They just can't relate to it. And so and then there's a lot of things about their life that I want to know that I can't relate to because I haven't gone through it. So I love that point. The being soft, but also expanding it to all the generations.
Yes, yes, that level of grace. We have to have it for ourselves and for each other, because, like,
Right.
that fantastic environment that you mentioned you were in, just the conversations between, oh, I never thought of it, or oh, I didn't. It just can reveal some simple things to you. Like you said, even I remember hearing too that you couldn't get medicine without permission from your husband. The doctor would say, "I'll talk to your husband about it." For a woman to be, I just heard these stories from my mother saying the things that we just couldn't
I have
imagine.
to tell you,
It just
that's still a conversation about healthcare and women and doctors, how a lot of male doctors treat women like their children. And that's a whole
Yes,
other conversation we could have.
right.
Should bring a
Like,
doctor on, a woman doctor. We should talk about that. But yeah,
yes, I
very.
recommend. I have some, I'm sure plenty. I have some too that can talk about that. Yes,
So, as you
exactly.
know, I could talk to you forever, and anyone
I
wanting a
know.
great executive coach, you have to go to Elayne. And if you're looking for building your spiritual, emotional, mental muscles, come to me.
Go to
And
Barbara.
there's so many different people out there and women out there who have such incredible resource. But what do you want to leave people with? Give us one gem. You have so many of them, Elayne.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, thank you so much. I love sharing space and time with you. And what I will leave you with is, to be the, you can be the boss and still be soft.
I love that. You could be the boss and she'll see. So what's the best way for people to reach you?
Yes, you can go to elaynefluker.com, or please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's just, Elayne Fluker, ELAYNEFLUKER on LinkedIn. I'd love to see you there. I share a lot about career, but also about these soft skills, if you will, healthy boundaries, emotional intelligence. And I'm going to have an interview with Barbara coming up. I'm manifesting that.
Yay.
So
No, I
that'll be
should fly
coming
down
soon.
to Mexico. We should do it
I
on the
know,
beach.
let's do it by the boot. Exactly. Exactly.
Wouldn't that be fabulous? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you. We're going to
Barbara.
do this again. And, I'm so glad that Women's History Month kind of gave me a shot in the arm to kind of do this again. So I'm really
Yes.
excited about having all these fabulous women share all their knowledge. So I love you. You're the best.
Love you.
And
Thank
everyone,
you.
stay soft.
Stay safe.